The voicemail came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I remember because I'd just turned off the kitchen light and was heading to bed, and my phone lit up on the counter. I almost didn't listen to it. I was tired, the kind of tired that settles into your bones when you're 63 and you've been on your feet since 6 in the morning. But something made me stop. It was my son's voice, short, flat, like he was reading from a script someone else had written. "Mum, Trish and I have talked it over, and we've decided it's better for everyone if we have some space. We think it's best if you don't reach out for a while. We'll contact you when we're ready." That was it. 42 seconds. 20 years of being his mother, and I got 42 seconds on a voicemail at midnight. I stood in my kitchen in Guelph, in the house where he grew up, holding my phone, and I just stood there. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just kept thinking when we're ready. Like I was a situation to be managed. Like I was a problem they'd decided to table for later. I didn't sleep that night. I made tea. I didn't drink. And sat at the kitchen table where my son used to do his homework, where we used to eat Sunday dinners when his father was still alive. I looked at the chair he always sat in, and I thought about all the years I had spent making sure that boy had everything he needed. And then I opened my banking app and looked at the 2 automatic transfers I had set up 8 months ago. One for $800 a month to help cover their mortgage. One for $400 a month toward my grandson's daycare. $1,200 every first of the month, going to a household that had just told me to disappear. I closed the app without doing anything, but I didn't stop thinking about it. My son's name is Patrick. He's 34, works in project management at a firm in Mississauga, and he married Trish 4 years ago at a small ceremony in Niagara-on-the-Lake. I liked Trish at first. She was organized, efficient, the kind of person who sends thank you cards within 48 hours and always knows where her keys are. My late husband Gerald used to say she reminded him of a very competent office manager. He meant it kindly. Gerald was like that. Gerald passed 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and merciless. The way that particular disease tends to be. Patrick was shattered. We both were. And for a while after, we leaned on each other the way you do when you've both lost the same person. He'd call me on Sunday evenings. He'd come for dinner. For about 6 months after Gerald died, my son and I were closer than we've been since he was a teenager. Then he and Trish bought the house. It was too much house. I knew it when I saw the listing. A 4-bedroom detached in Oakville, $1.3 million. With a finished basement and a backyard they had no time to maintain. Patrick was making decent money, but not that kind of money. And Trish had gone part-time after their son Owen was born. I did the math in my head at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and I thought, they cannot afford this without help. I should have kept that thought to myself. Instead, I offered. I was still working part-time then, doing bookkeeping for a small accounting firm 3 days a week. I'd gone back after Gerald died just to have somewhere to be. Between that and Gerald's life insurance and my own CPP, I was managing fine. Not extravagantly, but fine. And I had some money set aside, not a fortune, but savings Gerald and I had built together over 40 years of careful living. Patrick said he didn't want to take my money. He said it twice. But Trish was quiet in that particular way of hers. That meant she was listening very carefully, and I noticed that Patrick's eyes went to her before he said no, and then went to her again when I pushed a little. 2 weeks later, Patrick called me and said they'd worked out a budget, and if I was really sure about it, they could use a hand with the mortgage and daycare while Trish was part-time. Just until she went back full-time in the spring. Spring came and went. Trish did not go back full-time. She went back 2 days a week, which he called transitional, and the help I was giving quietly became permanent. I didn't mind at first. Owen was my only grandchild and I adored him. I got to spend every other Saturday with him. I'd pick him up and we'd go to the farmer's market on Stone Road or drive out to the conservation area and feed the ducks. Those were good days. Owen used to fall asleep on the drive home with his mouth open and his boots still on. And I'd carry him inside and tuck him on the couch, and Trish would come out of whatever room she'd retreated to and take him upstairs without saying much to me. I noticed over time that Trish said less and less to me. I told myself she was tired. I told myself she was an introvert. I told myself it had nothing to do with me. Looking back, I think she had decided something about me very early on, and she just never told me what it was. The changes happened slowly enough that I talked myself out of seeing them. Patrick stopped calling on Sundays. I assumed he was busy. He stopped coming for dinner unless I specifically invited him. And then the invitations got further and further apart because I'd started to feel like I was imposing, which is a strange thing to feel about your own child in your own home. When I asked how things were going, he'd say, "Good, busy," and pivot to something else. He stopped asking about my week. Once, I mentioned that I'd had a rough few days, nothing serious, just my knee acting up, and a minor issue with a client at work that had stressed me out. And he said, "That's too bad, Mom," in a tone that made it clear he'd already moved on in his mind. I remember getting off that call and sitting with a feeling I couldn't name at first. It took me a while to realize it was loneliness, the specific kind that's worse than ordinary loneliness because it lives inside a relationship that's supposed to protect you from it. I started noticing things at the house too, small things that piled up. Trish had stopped inviting me over for Owen's things. His first skating lesson, I found out from Patrick's Instagram. His 4th birthday party. I was told afterward, casually, as if it had slipped their minds. When I said I would have liked to be there, Trish said they'd wanted to keep it small and low-key, and then I found out later there had been 11 children and a rented bouncy castle in the backyard. I brought it up with Patrick one afternoon when I'd driven over to drop off a winter coat I'd found on sale in Owen's size. He met me at the door. He didn't invite me in. Trish just finds big gatherings stressful, Mum. It's not about you. But I'm his grandmother, Patrick. I'm not a guest. I'm family. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not angry exactly, more like impatient. Like I was taking up time he didn't have. "I know, Mom, but we have to do things our way." I drove home and I cried the whole way on the 401, and I'm lucky I didn't cause an accident. The money kept going out. 800, 400, every first of the month, automatic, like a subscription I'd forgotten I'd signed up for. I had left the firm by then. My knees were worse, and frankly the commute into Cambridge, 3 days a week, wasn't worth it anymore. I was living on CPP and OAS and a small RIF withdrawal, which was enough but required me to be careful. I'd started clipping grocery flyers again, which I hadn't done since Patrick was small. I'd put off getting new orthotics because I told myself I could wait another month. My friend Wendy, who I've known since our children were in primary school together, asked me once why I kept sending the money. "Because it's for Owen," I said. "The daycare money goes to Owen." "Does it?" she said. I didn't answer her. I didn't want to think about what she was implying, but I thought about it later, in the way you think about things you've been trying not to. Trish was back to work 2 days a week. Owen was in daycare 5 days a week. I was sending $400 a month toward that cost. I had never once been sent a receipt, a statement, anything written down at all. I had asked once, early on, if they wanted me to pay the daycare directly, and Trish had said it was easier if the money just went into their joint account and they handled it. Patrick had nodded. I had let it go. The voicemail came 8 months after I'd started sending the money. I went back and counted afterward. 8 months. $9,600. The morning after I heard it, I called Patrick. He didn't answer. I called again that evening. He picked up on the 4th ring and said he was in the middle of something. And I said I'd heard his message and I just wanted to understand what had happened. And he said Trish felt that things had become complicated and they needed some time. And I asked what had become complicated. And he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "She just feels like there's a lot of pressure from your end." "Pressure," I repeated. "She doesn't want to talk about the details right now, Mom. We just need some space." I thought about saying a great many things. I thought about telling him that I had been putting $1,200 a month into his household for 8 months. I thought about telling him that I'd skipped getting medical care because I was trying not to pull more from my RIF. I thought about asking him what exactly I had done that counted as pressure. Instead, I said, "Okay, Patrick, I'll give you space," and I hung up. I sat with it for 2 days. 2 days of very quiet, very careful thinking. On the third morning, I called my bank. I cancelled both transfers. I won't pretend I felt triumphant about it. That's not the truth. The truth is, I sat on the edge of my bed after I hung up with the bank, and I felt a grief I don't have a clean word for. Like losing something twice. I'd already lost Patrick gradually, slowly, over the past year and a half without quite realizing it was happening. And now, the cancelling of those transfers felt like acknowledging the loss out loud. Like saying, yes, this is real, but I also felt something else. Something quieter underneath the grief. A kind of clarity. I was 63 years old. I had worked for 40 years. I had been a good wife, a present mother, a devoted grandmother to a little boy who might not even remember these Saturday mornings we'd had together. I had given and bent myself sideways to fit into whatever shape this family required me to be in. And the night I stopped being useful, I got 42 seconds on a voicemail. That clarity told me, you do not owe this. My friend Wendy said almost the exact same thing when I told her what I'd done. She said it quietly with a cup of tea in her hands, sitting at my kitchen table. You don't owe them your savings account, Gail. You just don't. I had not told many people. I'd told Wendy, and I told my sister Donna, who lives in Victoria. And that was it. I was embarrassed, I think, in the way parents are embarrassed by their children's behavior, even when the child is a grown adult who should know better. I felt like it reflected on me somehow, like I had failed at something. Donna said, you did not fail. He failed, and she probably helped him. 3 weeks went by. Nothing. Then 6 weeks. I filled my days. I took a watercolor class at the community center on Wednesday mornings. I'd always wanted to, and Gerald had always said someday, and someday had never come, so I went by myself. I had Wendy over for dinner on Fridays. I called Donna more. I went to the farmer's market by myself on Saturdays, and I bought things I liked, and I took a different route home. I thought about Owen every day. I missed him in a way that was physical, like an ache in the chest when you breathe in too fast. I had pictures of him on my refrigerator, one of him at the conservation area, asleep on my shoulder with his boots still on. I looked at it every morning and I tried to believe that someday he would be old enough to find me on his own. On the 9th week, Patrick called. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. His voice was different this time. Less flat, less rehearsed. He said they'd had some things come up, and could we please talk? I called him back the next morning, when I'd had coffee and time to settle myself. The transfers stopped, he said, almost immediately. Yes, I said. They did. Mom, you asked for space, Patrick. I'm giving you space. That includes financial space. Silence. We're behind on the mortgage, he said finally. His voice was smaller than I'd heard it since he was a boy. I took a breath. I thought about this moment. I'd thought about whether I would feel vindicated or sad, and the answer was neither, exactly. I just felt tired and honest. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. That sounds very stressful. Can we come see you? Patrick, I need to understand something first. What happened? Not Trish needs space. What actually happened? Another silence. Longer this time. Then, haltingly, in pieces, he told me. It came out over 2 phone calls, and then an afternoon at my kitchen table, Patrick sitting in his old chair without Trish, who had stayed home. There was a lot I hadn't known. Some of it I'd sensed and talked myself out of. Some of it I hadn't known at all. Trish had been telling Patrick for over a year that I was too involved, that my health felt like control, that she couldn't make decisions in her own home without feeling like I had an opinion. Patrick had tried to defend me, he said, and I believed him because I know who my son is under all of it, but Trish was immovable, and Patrick had been trying so hard to keep the peace that he'd slowly stopped pushing back. He'd told himself he'd talk to me properly later. Later never came. And then she had drafted the voicemail message herself and asked him to record it. He looked at the table when he told me that last part. She wrote it, he said. She sat next to me while I read it. I let that sit between us for a moment. And the money, Patrick. Did you know I'd stocked my own physiotherapy appointment so I could keep sending it? His face did something complicated. I don't think he had known. I don't think he'd let himself ask. No, he said quietly. The $400 for daycare. Did it go to daycare? He was quiet for a moment too long. Some of it did, he said. I nodded. I had suspected. I didn't say I'd suspected because it wasn't the point anymore. What I said was, I love you. I have always loved you. But I am not a financial resource. I'm your mother. And if that's ever going to mean something again, it has to mean something on both sides. He cried then. My 34-year-old son sat in his childhood kitchen and cried, and I put my hand on his arm and let him, because that's what mothers do. Even the ones who've been reading the Riot Act. I want to be honest about what happened after that, because I don't think these stories do anyone any favors when they wrap up too neatly. Patrick and Trish went through a very rough period. There were couples counseling sessions. Patrick told me about them without going into detail, and I respected that. There were hard conversations I wasn't part of, and wasn't meant to be part of. At one point in early winter, Patrick called me and said things were uncertain, and he didn't know how things would land. And I said, whatever happens, Owen has a grandmother who loves him, and that doesn't go away. I did not restart the automatic transfers. I want to be clear about that. I made that decision consciously and deliberately. If they needed help in the future, I was willing to have an honest conversation about it. What was needed, what was realistic, with receipts and transparency and a clear end date. But automatic, unquestioned, indefinite money from a woman on a fixed income to a household that had told her to disappear? No. That chapter was finished. I also want to be honest that it cost me something to hold that line. There were nights I second-guessed myself. There were moments I almost called and said, just tell me what you need. Love does that to you. Love makes the line very hard to hold. But I held it. In February, Trish called me. I almost didn't pick up. She asked if she could come over, just the two of us, and I said yes, come for tea. She sat across from me at this same kitchen table and she said, I made things very hard for your family, and I'm sorry. She didn't explain herself much beyond that. And I didn't push because I had learned something in those months about the difference between understanding and resolution. You don't always get the full explanation. Sometimes you get the apology and you decide what to do with it. I said, I accept that. And I want us to do better. Owen came the following Saturday. He ran in through the front door in his boots and his orange parka and launched himself at me like I was a landing pad, which I suppose I was. He said, Grandma, did you know penguins can't fly? And I said I did know that. And he said, but they can swim really fast with great urgency, as though this were news I needed immediately. I held him and breathed him in and thought about my husband Gerald and about the conservation area and about the 42-second voicemail and about the watercolor class and about Wendy sitting across from me saying, you don't owe them your savings account. I thought about all of it, this whole complicated year, and I thought, here is what remains. Here is what the hard thing was for. I don't know what the next years look like. I don't make promises about that anymore. Life took Gerald in 8 months and taught me that promises about the future are mostly wishes with extra steps. What I know is that I am 63 years old, and I am still here. I have my house and my watercolors and my Saturdays. I have Wendy and Donna and a grandson who brings me breaking news about penguins, and I have a son who, I think, is slowly learning the difference between keeping the peace and building it. That's enough to work with. For now, that is enough. I used to think that loving someone well meant making yourself as easy as possible for them to take. No conditions, no complaints, no inconvenient needs of your own. I thought that was what a good mother looked like. I thought that's what Gerald and I had tried to build. A family where you showed up, you gave what you had, and you didn't keep score. What I didn't understand until this past year is that there's a difference between generosity and erasure. I was so busy being available that I'd stopped being real. I'd become a function, a direct deposit, and somewhere in the process of making myself that convenient, I'd made it very easy for people to forget I was a person with limits. The voicemail Patrick left, the one Trish wrote for him, it cracked something open. Not because it was cruel, though it stung, but because it forced me to sit with a question I'd been avoiding for a long time. What had I actually built with all that giving? Had I built closeness, or had I just been buying proximity and calling it love? The honest answer was hard. The $600 I'd sent hadn't bought me a seat at Owen's birthday party. It hadn't bought me a Sunday call, or a conversation where my son asked how my knee was doing, or a single moment where Trish looked at me like I belonged in the room. What it had bought me was the feeling, the temporary, fragile feeling, that I was needed, and I had confused being needed with being valued. Those are not the same thing. When I cancelled those transfers, I wasn't punishing Patrick. I want to be clear about that. I was simply telling the truth about what was and wasn't sustainable. That's something I should have done 8 months earlier, maybe 2 years earlier. I'd been so afraid that pulling back financially would mean losing him completely that I'd kept pouring money into a dynamic that was slowly making me smaller. The irony is that holding the line, finally, clumsily, painfully, was what created the conditions for something real to grow back. I think about what it took for Patrick to sit in that kitchen chair and tell me the truth. That took courage from him. And I think about what it took for Trish to call me and say she was sorry without a script. That took something too. None of us got here gracefully. We all had to be cracked open a little first. What I know now, at 63, is that the choices we make when things are hard reveal more about our character than the choices we make when things are easy. I could have called Patrick the day after that voicemail and offered more money just to make the pain stop. Part of me wanted to. But the wiser, quieter part knew that would have been the wrong kind of kindness, the kind that solves the immediate discomfort and deepens the underlying problem. Holding that line required me to trust my own judgment when everything in me wanted to defer. It required me to believe that I deserved honesty and transparency, not because I'd earned it through payments, but simply because I was a person in a relationship. That belief, it turns out, was something I had to rebuild in myself before anyone else could catch up to it. I'm not sure what the next chapter holds, but I know I'm walking into it as myself, and that after a very long time of walking in as whatever was needed, feels like enough.